Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the latest developments from the front line. Starting out in the north by the Kupyansk area, we see that the Russian forces continue their attempts at advancing in this part of the front line as they try to push the Ukrainian forces back towards Kupyansk, as well as the road supplying the Ukrainian units in the area. According to latest reports, the Ukrainian forces here are mostly just mechanized brigades. There's two infantry brigades, the rest are mechanized brigades. This is an indication that most of the infantry have retreated across the Oska River line from the eastern bank to the western bank in this direction to avoid fighting the Russian forces and to withdraw across, and then mechanized units being on the eastern side so that they can have a fighting retreat across the river line if necessary. This is an indication of a Ukrainian withdrawal. At the same time, there has been an evacuation notice to the north of Kupyansk and generally the area here to the north. So this is an indication that the Ukrainians expect this to either be a front line zone or that they expect the Russians to launch attacks in this area in general. So the situation here is that the Russians are now on a day-to-day basis advancing. The Ukrainian forces have now retrieved and been pushed out of Syn'kivka, so the Russian forces are now on a day-to-day basis advancing across the front line here in the north. They have also started attacks in the direction of Kupyansk as well as Syn'kivka, attacking both of the flanks, both to the north and to the south, and this is an indication that they want to reach the road here so that they can establish a front line by the river line here to the west, Syn'kivka, and if they manage to actually capture the village of Syn'kivka and Khomelny, they'll be able to then push westwards or northwards from these directions. The trend in this area is that the Russians throughout the past days, I think the past 4 days, have advanced daily, and they are now closing in on the frontline villages of the Ukrainian forces. They are attacking the direction of Ivanivka, Kislivka, Kupyansk, as well as pushing the Ukrainians out of Syn'kivka. The next line of defense for the Ukrainians is by the road itself, so the Ukrainians will be able to fight here in this road as they try to withdraw from these positions if the Russians actually increase their focus and advances in this area and increase their attacks. They'll force the Ukrainians to withdraw, and they will have to withdraw through the road to the north. That is why the Ukrainians need to defend this area so that they are able to retreat without being constantly under fire. The Ukrainian forces are now in a terrible positions because they have lost Syn'kivka. With the loss of Syn'kivka, Russia is now close enough to attack the village of Petropavlivka, and the whole open field in this area is able for the Russians to traverse through and hit the Ukrainian supply line. So the Ukrainians either need to recapture Syn'kivka or push the Russians back whenever they try to advance in this part of the front line. As they are now advancing everywhere, this means that the Ukrainians need to send reinforcements. But as I've mentioned in the previous video, because they have sent so much reinforcements to this part of the front, they are unable to continue the same effect on their offensive as they had last month. So this means that they need to either withdraw units from this area and hold the defensive line by the Oska River line, or they would need to send further reinforcements and delay the offensive further. And we're now in the mid stages of August, so we're closing in on the fall season, after which the rainy season will begin. There will be a lot of mud, and it will be very difficult to launch an offensive. So the Ukrainians are closing in on the deadline of their offensive. Meanwhile, the Russian forces are launching their maneuvers here in the north, which is distracting the main push of the Ukrainian forces. So they need to make a decision, hard, tough decision under pressure right now. Will they retrieve from the eastern bank of the Oska River line, or will they focus everything they have on the offensive, or will they retrieve and send units and reinforcements to the east of the Oska River line? It seems to me that they are retreating from the Oska River line with their lack of infantry and focus of mechanized units in the north, after which they will establish a defensive line in this area and then focus on the offensive the rest of this month. Moving on, there are some developments on the flanks of Bakhmut. Starting out in the north, south of Syn'kivka and west of Yahidne, the Russian forces have again managed to push the Ukrainian forces back to the canal line, although the Ukrainians now have control further south of the river line and have established positions here to the south of Yahidne. The Russian forces now have full control over the eastern bank of the canal here to the south of Syn'kivka. So the Ukrainians are currently pushing in the south, and the Russian forces have managed to push the Ukrainians back in the north. And the fighting here, we actually see a significant increase in the amount of munitions the Russian forces are using both in the northern and in the southern flanks, as they have, it is recorded in this video here, started using thermite bombs, which the last time it was used was when back in May the Russians were very close to capturing Bakhmut. So the general situation across the front is that the Russians are turning to the offensive. The Ukrainians have been ongoing with their offensive for over 2 months now, and they have essentially slowed down significantly since the start of August. In comparison, the Russians have significantly sped up the amount of offensive operations they do since the start of August. As for to the south of Bakhmut on the southern flank, the Ukrainian attempts at bypassing Syn'kivka continues as they continue with further assaults in the direction of Andriivka as well as Syn'kivka. Although the Russian forces have managed to recapture the southern parts, the Ukrainian forces continue their assaults here to the north in the direction of Andriivka as well as Syn'kivka, as their focus on Geopolitics has withdrawn, as they now focus on the villages of Andriivka as well as Syn'kivka, as they are much more important. If the Ukrainians are able to bypass Syn'kivka to the south by capturing Andriivka, they can then make a two-pronged attack to the north and to the south to encircle the village. Then we move on to the Uledar area, where here the Ukrainian forces have managed to successfully push the Russians out of the Dacha area here to the southeast of Uledar, and fighting continues in the direction of Mikhailsk as the Ukrainians attempt to further expand their positions in this area, as well as to establish their positions and consolidate their positions that they've recently regained from the fighting here to the southeast of Uledar. As for the Uroshaina area, here fighting continues as the Ukrainian forces continue their attempts at attacking from the west and to the north. We have seen recently satellite images of the Russian fortifications and some of the Ukrainian losses in this area, and those fights continue. The Ukrainians launch another wave as they continue their attempts at capturing the village. They try to storm it as they have reached the outskirts of it. So the next step is to take control over it. With the supportive fighter from the west, it is easier for them to compete for the village. Then we move on to the Robotyne area, where here again the Ukrainian forces continue their attempts at advancing. Although they are seeing less success recently, they have managed to actually push the Russians back slightly in the direction of Verbove, but they are also focusing on the central part where the Russian forces have recently captured territories, which means that they are less entrenched here than in other parts, so they are looking for an opportunity to push the Russians back again. But so far the Russians are holding their positions as they continuously try to defend the front against the Ukrainian forces in this offensive here in the south. That is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and have a great day.